Yesler Community Center is about 4 blocks from SU, and most of the students, when they volunteer, they walk. They don't take a bus or they don't drive. So it's in a walking distance, maybe 5 to 10 minutes.
Asfaha and I worked together in the summer for a 6-week media program. We teach video and audio, and we teach research and so forth to teenagers, about 15. We engage Seattle University students quite regularly. We have mentors who are actually paid mentors to work with us in the classroom. We also have Seattle University students who volunteer.
I can add that I work for the same organization for about 20 years. And for the last 20 years, I had really very close contact or relationship with Seattle University. And hundreds of students volunteer in different capacities, in different seasons and programs. Also, a lot of SU students volunteer throughout the year. There is after-school program for homework help and a science STEM program. Students come, and throughout the year, maybe more than a couple dozen students may volunteer at SU.
Also, throughout the academic year, many faculty at Seattle University teach classes that have a community engagement component. So you'll most likely find yourself along the way at least once, and often several times, in a class in which part of your activities and part of your curriculum is to work sometimes as a volunteer individually, and often as a volunteer as a team member with various community organizations.
And I can speak more from the perspective of the Center for Community Engagement. So we have an initiative called the Seattle University Youth Initiative, in which we partner with different schools around the neighborhood to place Seattle youth students in their schools. And so we partner with Garfield High School, Washington Middle School, and Bailey Gatzler Elementary School, which is my site. And we tutor and mentor students in those schools, either one-on-one or in group settings. And so there are volunteer opportunities there. You might be placed there as a service learner if you're part of one of the classes that Claire just mentioned. And we also offer work study and non-work study positions throughout the year.
So there's a great deal of professional engagement and professional growth that happens, leading to opportunities for them to pursue a little bit further afterwards. So I've seen that several times, especially with design and photography students in my own department.
Yes, there are so many service providers around Yesler, like Seattle Housing, Parks and Rec, Seattle School District, and other like Neighborhood House. And not everyone, but some volunteers, they go beyond their volunteer time. Some of the students, they come because, like Claire earlier said, they are required by the class for 16 hours to volunteer. But some stay longer. For example, in my case, they stayed for almost a year. And at that time, they really do a wonderful relationship, create a wonderful relationship and networking with Seattle Housing, with Parks, with City of Seattle, and that's how they can develop their network.
I went to Seattle University as an undergraduate, and I worked with the Center for Community Engagement for all 4 years before I graduated and took on this full-time position. And so I did get to be a part of a special graduation ceremony that was held at the Center for Community Engagement on campus. And I also got a cord for as part of my graduation regalia.
There was a faculty, I'm not sure exactly, but they came and did a really big project, a research, something to do with safety, law enforcement, use of funding, and it was led by a SU professor. And they came up with some kind of study after 2-3 years. And I remember we were part of a lot of volunteers. They came to surveys, study group. So they came up in safety for the whole Yesler and surrounding areas. Yesler Community Center area, there are about 5 or 6 service providers and non-profit organizations, and most of their employees are social workers. So once you volunteer for a Yesler Community Center with youth, with adults, with seniors, or with immigrants, you will have a chance to meet with a lot of service providers, means with a lot of social workers. And that could be a good networking or a good link to develop or to learn from those social providers. Not far from SU, the juvenile center for King County, it's just between Yesler and SU. And I remember we did some summer program regarding that youth juvenile center. We did some small research and a small documentary film last 2 years ago or a year ago.
I believe the law school also has a really great project where they'll work with youth for traffic violations, and they'll actually have court with the youth working as members of the court to mitigate traffic violations amongst other youth. So there's a lot of very innovative programs throughout the School of Social Work, the School of Theology, obviously, criminal justice, the art department, social work and education. There's just, and STEM.
I had so many volunteers in the different capacities. Yes, there are some who are required by their school, by their professor, and about 16 hours, it's a kind of requirement. There are a lot of students who come because they are required, they come and do their 16 hours and leave. It could be tutoring, it could be some hardware technology or some teaching, but also there are project-based volunteers. We use them in a different capacity, and they are really wonderful, and they have a lot of experience working. I myself knew I learned a lot from the volunteers, but always when we think about volunteering, it's almost both ways. In fact, sometimes the students benefit more than the people who get the help. In a way, I get a lot of feedback from the volunteers saying how beneficial was their site or the volunteering. Also, my son, he also did some volunteering and some work for the community engagement and other SU projects. And it really gave him a complete different kind of worldly thinking. He used to be at home, very shy, by himself. He did here and there, he loved soccer always, but when he joined SU, he completely changed. Even though we live in Seattle, I saw him changing completely. He became a full responsible adult. So that tells me he learned, not only he learned what the subjects or the academic part, but he really, really changed it as a person.
Something that echoes very much what Asfaha is saying. They feel a sense of accomplishment. They also learn a way of being in the world that they would not otherwise have understood or known. They meet people in communities that are different than communities that they themselves come from. They broaden their understanding of their sense of community as a member of Seattle University to understand that they're not just a student on a campus, but they're part of a much, much larger world. They're communities of this entire neighborhood. Those are also the same students that are constantly seeking out other opportunities to continue to find different ways to serve, to work with communities. It's a really rich opportunity. And my students have told me time and time and time again that it's often been the high point, actually, of their time at SU.
From personal experience, that volunteering and later working with the Center for Community Engagement has definitely changed absolutely everything. My major is international studies. It is not in education, but volunteering and working at Bailey Gatzler has allowed me to discover a passion for education that I didn't have before. And so I can talk about the actual skills I learned, like leadership skills, working in teams. I've gained a lot of those skills, but I've also found friends through the Center for Community Engagement, lifelong mentors in the people that work there. And that's really ultimately why I chose to stay an extra year after graduation. And so I definitely highly encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities. So I can talk about the day at Bailey Gatzer. We have an after school program. And so that starts at about 2 p.m. after the regular school day ends. And so usually our employees or volunteers come check in and then kind of meet with their team for about 15 minutes. And so set up the activities for that day, just get ready for the students to come. And then when students are dismissed, they go to their table or their room, depending on where their session is happening that day. They get to eat snack, and then they transition into different activities. And so it usually would be reading, writing, math, science, STEM related things. And yeah, it lasts about an hour and a half or 2 hours. Usually our volunteers and employees stay there from about 2 to 5, because after the after school program ends and students go home, we usually have a debriefing session where so me and both my coworkers that run the program with me kind of talk with volunteers and see what went well, what didn't go so well, and so where we can change and improve things.
At Yesler Terrace Youth Media, that's an intensive program, but a typical day is starting at 9:30. Everybody kind of comes on board, and we play a couple of games to kind of loosen up and get our minds working and feel like we're all together. And then we have morning sessions, and volunteers will work with youth depending on the day to learn certain things about technology and video, learn things about the neighborhood, learn about the issues in the neighborhood. Then we have lunch, which is always great. And then we'll kick back in the afternoon, and students will work independently in teams and with volunteers working with them to create their original works like videos and so forth. So that's an example of sort of an all-day program.
Most students are willing to help do some kind of technology. Some students help us teach programming or do some Facebook or some those technological skills or hardware. We also work with a couple professors who did programming language, and they brought students, and the students volunteer or tutoring the students who does the programming. And volunteers, also we had different kind of volunteers who those volunteers were project-based, means we have a problem and they help us solve the problems.
I've definitely had quarters where I was more busy than others with schoolwork, especially as a senior. I personally found it very easy to communicate with my supervisor, whatever was happening. They're all aware that you are students, and so obviously your schoolwork comes first. And so as long as you communicate with them, there's no problem with you taking time off and then coming back later or just adjusting your hours. Yeah, I just encourage you to really communicate with them. As a supervisor, I also am in constant communication with the employees or volunteers, and they always let me know if they're feeling either overwhelmed or too busy with schoolwork, and so we always accommodate that. As a student, I did volunteer and work for the Center for Community Engagement while also working part-time at different departments on campus. And as a supervisor, I see that a lot as well. So we definitely have a lot of people that volunteer and work at the same time.
I work with a senior communication students. The only time I went and I met the students and the professor was to tell my problem that I have, and I asked the students to help me figure out, build, and study, research, and help me figure out the solution. So I only met them the first day. Then all the communication was through Zoom and phone or through email. but they finished the project and they just put it in a Google Drive and share it with me. So that's how we did it. In fact, it was a wonderful project and it was really successful.
So on our end, we did have a major reduction in employees and volunteers because of the coronavirus and because of how many students have had to go home. But some of the things we've been partnering to do, for example, is virtual read alouds. So we've had some of our employees just read children's books over Zoom, and we've shared that link with some of our schools, and families have been able to log in, and students have still been able to see their mentors read them books. Still working to start next week virtual mentoring sessions where for the higher grades for high school and middle school level, they're still able to communicate with their mentors over Zoom. And so we're trying to adapt as, you know, things start to progress, again, depending on best practices recommended by public health and the university. We plan hopefully to go back to schools in person in the fall.
As we move forward into the kind of unknown of how to, we have a conversation, we're partners within our communities. So we figure it out together.